Hello everyone. So let's start reading from where we have left. A logodrama. I should like to cite the following instance. Once, the mother of a boy who had died at the age of 11 years was admitted to my hospital department after a suicide attempt. Dr. Kurt Kokorek invited her to join a therapeutic group, and it happened that I stepped into the room where he was conducting a psychodrama. She was telling her story. At the death of her boy, she was left alone with another, older son, who was crippled, suffering from the effects of infantile paralysis. The poor boy had to be moved around in a wheelchair. His mother, however, rebelled against her fate. But when she tried to commit suicide together with him, it was the crippled son who prevented her from doing so. He liked living. For him, life had remained meaningful. Why was it not so for his mother? How could her life still have a meaning? And how could we help her to become aware of it? Improvising. I participated in the discussion and questioned another woman in the group. I asked her how old she was, and she answered 30. I replied, no, you are not 30, but instead 80 and lying on your deathbed. And now you are looking back on your life, a life which was childless but full of financial success and social prestige. And then I invited her to imagine what she would feel in this situation. What will you think of it? What will you say to yourself? Let me quote what she actually said from a tape which was recorded during that session. Oh, I married a millionaire. I had an easy life full of wealth and I lived it up. I flirted with men, I teased them, but now I am 80. I have no children of my own. Looking back as an old woman, I cannot see what all that was for. Actually, I must say my life was a failure. I then invited the mother of the handicapped son to imagine herself similarly looking back over her life. Let us listen to what she had to say, as recorded on the tape. I wish to have children, and this wish has been granted to me. One boy died. The other, however, the crippled one, would have been sent to an institution if I had not taken over his care. Though he is crippled and helpless, he is after all my boy, and so I have made a fuller life possible for him. I have made a better human being out of my son. At this moment, there was an outburst of tears and crying. She continued, as for myself, I can look back peacefully on my life, for I can say my life was full of meaning, and I have tried too hard to fulfill it. I have done my best. I have done the best for my son. My life was no failure. Viewing her life as if from her deathbed she had suddenly been able to see a meaning in it, a meaning which even included all of her sufferings. By the same token, however, it had become clear as well that a life of short duration, like that, for example, of a dead boy, could be so rich in joy and love that it could contain more meaning than a life lasting 80 years. After a while I proceeded to another question, this time addressing myself to the whole group. The question was whether an ape which was being used to develop poliomyelitis serum and for this reason punctured again and again would ever be able to grasp the meaning of its suffering. Unanimously, Unanimously, the group replied that of course it would not. With its limited intelligence, it could not enter into the world of man. That is, the only world in which the meaning of its suffering would be understandable. Then I pushed forward with the following question. And what about man? Are you sure that the human world is a terminal point in the evolution of cosmos? Is it not conceivable that there is still another dimension, a world beyond man's world? A world in which the question of an ultimate meaning of human suffering could find an answer. The super meaning. This ultimate meaning necessarily exceeds and surpasses the finite intellectual capacities of man. In logotherapy, we speak in this context of a super meaning. What is demanded of a man is not, as some existential philosophers teach, to endure the meaninglessness of life, but rather to bear his incapacity to grasp its unconditional meaningfulness in rational terms. Logos is deeper than logic. A psychiatrist who goes beyond the concept of the super meaning will sooner or later be embarrassed by his patients, just as I was when my daughter, at about 6 years of age, asked me the question, "Why do we speak of the good Lord?" Whereupon I said, "Some weeks ago you were suffering from measles, and then the good Lord sent you full recovery." However, the little girl was not content. She retorted, "Well, but please, Daddy, do not forget, in the first place, he had sent me the measles." However, when a patient stands on the firm ground of religious belief, there can be no objection to making use of the therapeutic effect of his religious convictions and thereby drawing upon his spiritual resources. In order to do so, the psychiatrist may put himself in the place of the patient. That is exactly what I did once. For instance, when a rabbi from Eastern Europe turned to me and told me his story, he had lost his first wife and their 6 children in the concentration camp of Auschwitz, where they were cast, and now it turned out that his second wife was sterile. I observed that procreation is not the only meaning for life, for then life in itself would become meaningless, and something which in itself is meaningless cannot be rendered meaningful merely by its perpetuation. However, the rabbi evaluated his plight as an Orthodox Jew in terms of despair, that there was no son of his own who would ever say Kaddish for him after his death. But I would not give up. I made a last attempt to help him by inquiring whether he did not hope to see his children again in heaven. However, my question was followed by an outburst of tears, and now the true reason for his despair came to the fore. He explained that his children, since they died as innocent martyrs, were thus found worthy of the highest place in heaven. But as for himself, he could not expect, as an old sinful man, to be assigned the same place. I did not give up, but retorted, "Is it not conceivable, Rabbi, that precisely this was the meaning of your surviving your children? That you may be purified through these years of suffering, so that finally you, too, though not innocent like your children, may become worthy of joining them in heaven? Is it not resolved? It is not Is it not written in the Psalms that God preserves all your tears? So perhaps none of your sufferings were in vain." For the first time in many years, he found relief from his suffering through the new point of view which I was able to open up to him. Let's transitoriness, life's transitoriness. Those things which seem to take meaning away from human life include not only suffering but dying as well. I never tire of saying that the only really transitory aspects of life are the potentialities, but as soon as they are actualized, they are rendered realities at that very moment. They are saved and delivered into the past, wherein they are rescued and preserved from transitoriness. For in the past, nothing is irretrievably lost, but everything irrevocably stored. Thus, the transitoriness of our existence is in no way makes it meaningless, but it does constitute our responsibleness for everything thing hinges upon our realizing the essentially transitory possibilities. Man constantly makes his choice concerning the mass of present potentialities. Which of these will be condemned to non being and which will be actualized? Which choice will be made an actuality once and forever, an immortal footprint in the sands of time? At any moment, man must decide for better or for worse what will be the monument of his existence. Usually, to be sure, man considers only the stubble field of transitoriness and overlooks the full granaries of the past, wherein he had salvaged once and for all his deeds, his joys, and all his suffering. Nothing can be undone, and nothing can be done away with. I should say, having been is the surest kind of being. Logotherapy, keeping in mind the essential transitoriness of human existence, is not pessimistic, but rather activistic. To express this point figuratively, we might say the pessimist resembles a man who observes with fear, sadness, that his wall calendar, from which he daily tears a sheet, grows thinner with each passing day. On the other hand, the person who attacks the problem of life actively is like a man who removes each successive leaf from his calendar and files it neatly and carefully away with its predecessors after first having jotted down a few diary notes on the back. He can reflect with pride and joy on all the richness set down in these notes, on all the life he has already lived to the fullest. What will it matter to him if he notices that he is growing old? Has he any reason to envy the young people whom he sees or wax nostalgic over his own lost youth? What reason has he to envy a young person for the possibilities that a young person has the future which is in store for him? No, thank you, he will think. Instead of possibilities, I have realities in my past. Not only the reality of work done and of love loved, but of sufferings bravely suffered. These sufferings are even the things of which I am most proud, though these are things which cannot inspire envy. Logotherapy as a technique. A realistic fear, like the fear of death, cannot be tranquilized away by its psychodynamic interpretation. On the other hand, a neurotic fear, such as agoraphobia, cannot be cured by philosophical understanding. However, logotherapy has developed a special technique to handle such cases too. To understand what is going on whenever this technique is used, we take a starting point, a condition which is frequently observed in neurotic individuals, namely anticipatory anxiety. It is characteristic of this fear that it produces precisely that of which the patient is afraid. An individual, for example, who is afraid of blushing when he enters a large room and faces many people will actually be more prone to blush under these circumstances. In this context, one might amend the saying, the wish is father to the thought, to the fear is the mother of the event. Ironically enough, in the same way that fear brings to pass what one is afraid of, likewise, a forced intention makes impossible what one forcibly wishes. This excessive intention or hyperintention, as I call it, can be observed particularly in cases of sexual neurosis. The more a man tries to demonstrate his sexual potency or a woman her ability to experience orgasm, the less they are able to succeed. Pleasure is and must remain a side effect or byproduct and is destroyed and spoiled to the degree to which it is made a goal in itself. In addition to excessive intention, as described above, excessive attention or hyperreflection, as it is called in logotherapy, may also be pathogenic, that is, lead to sickness. The following clinical report will indicate what I mean. A young woman came to me complaining of being frigid. The case history showed that in her childhood she had been sexually abused by her father. However, it had not been this traumatic experience in itself which had eventuated in her sexual neurosis, as could easily be evidenced. For it turned out that through reading popular psychoanalytic literature, the patient had lived constantly with the fearful expectation of the toll which her traumatic experience would someday take. This anticipatory anxiety resulted both in excessive intention to confirm her femininity and excessive attention centered upon herself rather than upon her partner. This was enough to incapacitate the patient for the peak experience of sexual pleasure. Since the orgasm was made an object of intention and an object of attention as well, instead of remaining an unintended effect of the unreflected dedication and surrender to the partner. After undergoing short term logotherapy, the patient's excessive attention and intention of her ability to experience orgasm had been de-reflected to introduce another logotherapeutic term. When her attention was refocused toward the proper object, that is, the partner, orgasm established life spontaneously. Logotherapy bases its technique called paradoxical intention on the twofold fact that fear brings about which one is afraid of, and that hyperintention makes impossible what one wishes. In German, I describe paradoxical intention as early as 1939. In this approach, the phobic patient is invited to intake, even if only for a moment, precisely that which he fears. Let me recall a case. A young physician consulted me because of his fear of perspiring whenever he expected an outbreak of perspiration. This anticipatory anxiety was enough to precipitate excessive sweating. In order to cut this cycle formation, I advised the patient in the event that sweating should recur to resolve deliberately to show people how much he could sweat. A week later, he returned to report that whenever he met anyone who triggered his anticipatory anxiety, he said to himself, I only sweated out a quart before, but now I'm going to pour at least 10 quarts. The result was that after suffering from his phobia for 4 years, he was able, after a single session, to free himself permanently of it within 1 week. The reader will note that this procedure consists of a reversal of the patient's attitude, inasmuch as his fear is replaced by a paradoxical wish. By this treatment, the wind is taken out of the sails of the anxiety. Such a procedure, however, must make use of the specifically human capacity for self detachment, inherent in a sense of humor. This basic capacity to detach one from oneself is actualized whenever the logotherapeutic technique called paradoxical intention is applied. At the same time, the patient is enabled to put himself at a distance from his own neurosis. A statement consistent with this is found in Gordon W. Alport's work, The Individual and His Religion. The neurotic who learns to laugh at himself may be on the way to self management, perhaps to cure. Paradoxical intention is the empirical validation and clinical application of Allport's statement. A few more cases report may serve to clarify this method further. The following patient was a bookkeeper who had been treated by many doctors and in several clinics without any therapeutic success. When he was admitted to my hospital department, he was in extreme despair, confessing that he was close to suicide. For some years, He had suffered from a writer's cramp, which had recently become so severe that he was in danger of losing his job. Therefore, only immediate short term therapy could elevate the situation. In starting treatment, Dr. Eva Costera recommended to the patient that he do just the opposite of what he usually had done. Namely, instead of trying to write as neatly and legibly as possible, to write with the worst possible scrawl. He was advised to say to himself, "Now I will show people what a good scribbler I am." And at the moment in which he deliberately tried to scribble, he was unable to do so. "I tried to scrawl but simply could not do it," he said the next day. Within 48 hours, the patient was in this way freed from his writer's cramp, and remained free for the observation period after he had been treated. He is a happy man again and fully able to work. A similar case dealing, however, with speaking rather than writing was related to me by a colleague in the laryngological department of the Vienna Polyclinic hospital. It was the most severe case of stuttering he had come across in his many years of practice. Never in his life, as far as the stutterer could remember, had he been free from his speech trouble, even for a moment, except once. This happened when he was 12 years old and had booked a ride on a streetcar. When caught by the conductor, he thought that the only way to escape would be to elicit his sympathy, and so he tried to demonstrate that he was just a poor stuttering boy. At that moment, when he tried to stutter, he was unable to do it without meaning to. He had practiced paradoxical intention, though not for therapeutic purpose. However, this presentation should not leave the impression that paradoxical intention is effective only in symptomatic cases. By means of this logotherapeutic technique, my staff at the Vienna Polyclinic Hospital has succeeded in bringing relief even in obsessive compulsive neurosis of a more severe degree and duration. I refer, for instance, to a woman 65 years of age who had suffered for 60 years from a washing compulsion. Dr. Eva Hozdera started logotherapeutic treatment by means of paradoxical intention, and 2 months later, the patient was able to lead a normal life. Before admission to the neurological department of the Vienna Polyclinic Hospital, she had confessed life was hell for me. Handicapped by her compulsion and bacteriophobic obsession, she finally remained in bed all day, unable to do any housework. It would not be accurate to say that she is now completely free of symptoms, for an obsession may come to her mind. However, she is able to joke about it, as she says, in short, to apply paradoxical intention. Thank you, everyone. We will continue in the next video.